Hi, I'm Faisel Pervaiz, a South Asia analyst here at Stratfor, and today I'm joined by my colleague Omar Lamrani, a senior military analyst, to talk about the India-China standoff on Bhutan's Doklam Plateau. So Omar, this is an issue that you and I, along with the rest of the team, have been studying pretty intently for some time now, and it's really interesting, right? Because as a lot of our readers know, this started about 2 months ago in mid-June, when Indian troops crossed over into the Doklam Plateau, which is disputed territory between China and Bhutan, to stop a Chinese road construction project. And ever since then, we've seen a lot of statements come from both sides, some pretty firm rhetoric from China regarding that India must back off first before negotiations begin. We've seen on the Indian side, India saying that we're going to maintain our ground, but we want a diplomatic solution. And at the same time, we've seen troops on both sides camped out near each other near the Doklam Pass this entire time. And so, Omar, I guess I wanted to begin here that what is the big deal with this road that triggered this whole situation to begin with?
So the geography here actually matters quite a bit. This area, the Sikkim Chumbi Valley area, is a geographic zone where the Indians actually have a considerable advantage. They control the heights overlooking the Chumbi Valley, and they can direct fire on that critical supply road that the Chinese have leading into what we call the dagger. That dagger actually, which brings us to why the Chinese care about the Doklam Plateau. If they seize the Doklam Plateau and the Jamperi Ridge leading to the south of the Doklam Plateau, they will be able to do two things that threaten the Indians in turn, in a sector where they're disadvantaged. The first is that they can threaten the Siliguri corridor that leads from the main Indian territory to the northeastern states, Assam, Arunachal Pradesh, which is a very narrow corridor. And even more immediately, they can do the same thing to the Indians that the Indians already do to them in the Chumbi Valley, which is bring the critical roads that leads into Sikkim itself under fire. So in that sense, the Chinese are looking to gain an advantage in an area where they're disadvantaged by geography and where the Indians have control over the heights.
Okay, so this makes sense. So you're basically saying that if we look at a map, and you look at the Siliguri corridor, and they call this the chicken's neck, and it makes sense. It's this really tiny ribbon that connects mainland India with its far-flung northeastern wing, that India sees a critical vulnerability. And if China advances even 1 inch, India perceives that as threatening, and therefore they're going to try to impose some type of cost onto China.
Yes.
Now, another thing you told me about, Omar, which I thought was very interesting, kind of illuminated the subject from a broader perspective, is that this standoff has sort of zoomed in the world's attention on this kind of point on this border. But as you and I were talking about, I mean, this is a much bigger border between the world's 2 most populous countries. And that's not the only part of the border where they have an issue, right? I guess there's an issue all the way across. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Yes, absolutely. So the disputed areas between the two are referred to as the line of actual control.
Right.
And that line of actual control is 4,057 kilometers long. So very, very long. It extends way beyond the Sikkim Chumbi Valley sector. It can be divided into 3 main sectors. There's a Sikkim Chumbi Valley sector, which we just discussed. But there's also the Arunachal Pradesh sector, which the Indians control in the Chinese dispute.
Right.
And on the flip side, you have the Aksai Chin sector, which the Chinese control ever since 1962 war, in which a vital road extends the vital supply road for the Chinese, and the Indians dispute its unwanted back.
Right. I'm glad you mentioned the year 1962. I think it's worth just pausing on that just for one moment, in that if you are India and you are looking at a border issue with China, and you're an Indian strategic planner, obviously you're viewing this through the prism of 1962, when there was that short, intense war on the border. And so it makes sense to me in that context that why, even to this day, there's an issue with that border, and a lot of this is unresolved. But the other thing that I'm thinking about now is that so often when we're studying an issue, I feel that there's sort of the top layer that gets a lot of attention, but so often there is this underlying, slow-moving strategic element that's usually part of the picture. And this whole thing ostensibly began with a road, but as you were telling me, roads apparently play a bigger role in this than a lot of people realize.
Absolutely. We're talking about a singularly austere environment on top of the world, essentially. Very high areas. And ever since 1962, infrastructure has played a critical role. The Indians initially decided to not invest heavily on infrastructure, intentionally to impede any Chinese attack across the line of actual control. But what has actually happened is that the Chinese took the infrastructure advantage and used it to steadily encroach on that line of actual control, using salami slice tactics, taking an area slowly by slowly, as we've seen with this road. That has changed the strategic paradigm for New Delhi and their thoughts and strategic process on this. Ever since the early 1990s, but really since the 2000s, they've decided that they have to race on that infrastructure question as well. And so now we've seen a counter reaction by the Indians themselves extending their infrastructure across the line of actual control, raising various formations like the Mountain Strike Corps.
Right.
They're starting to contest this and this line of actual control, and that's why we're seeing more incidents with the Chinese, because it's not just the Chinese pushing; it's both of them pushing at each other.
Well, I tell you, I mean, there are some really fascinating angles to this. We talked about a military angle, a strategic angle. There's infrastructure, lots of stuff going on here. So we'll definitely be tracking this, in the weeks and months to come. Omar, thank you for that conversation. I really appreciate it. And for more in-depth analysis, please visit us at worldview.stratfor.com.